back to episode 17 of the Burkitt Encounter. Today I thought I would talk about the photographer and what actually is a photographer and who can be claimed to be called or be a photographer. It's a title I still use on all my websites, social media. I put at the top photographer, because even though I do another job alongside this full time, I see myself predominantly as a photographer. And I always equate it to that film Happy Gilmore, where he's desperate to be a hockey player, and it turns out he's dog shit at hockey but brilliant using a hockey stick to play golf, and becomes a good golfer and wins golf. But he's still crap at hockey player, but he still sees himself as a hockey player. And I've always heard my wife laugh with that, because I used to actually have that on my social media handle. I'm a hockey player, because I see myself as a photographer, because that's who I am, that's how I feel, that's how I got into the other job I also have through photography. So photography for me for the last 20 years has been the thing that's kind of cemented my whole being, and I see myself as a photographer. Plus I do still work, get commissions as a photographer, and I see myself as a photographer, and within that there are all caveat of other things which I bring into the party as a photographer, other things I've learned and done prior to that, but predominantly I see myself as a photographer. And I don't use tags like semi-professional, because semi-professional means nothing. You're either a professional or you're not. And professional, particularly in the field of photography, is a very bad, it's a misnomer. It doesn't mean anything other than you earn a few quid from it, really. But the tag professional gets tagged to photography all the time. And I always say, a doctor is a professional, but a doctor doesn't walk around going, "Oh, I'm a professional doctor." Or, a van driver is a professional van driver for a living, but doesn't walk around going, "I'm a professional van driver." Photographers, for some reason, I think it's because they think it makes them look good, like a proper photographer, when all it really does is make them look like a twat. So I try to avoid the professional tag as much as I can. But I've thought over the years, what is a photographer? What actually is a photographer? How can somebody be called a photographer? What is it about photography that makes them a photographer? I mean, obviously I'm a human being, but I class myself as a photographer, which is a bit daft really, because I'm a human who does photography. But I was watching the latest episode of the Joe Rogan Experience, when would it have been? Early last week. And he was interviewing Julian Lennon, who is John Lennon's son, as many of us, or all of us will know. And I've followed Julian for a long time, mostly because I'm a fan of his dad. I'm a big Beatles and John Lennon fan. And it's always good to see what the kids are doing, how their lives have developed. And Julian's been one of those who's had a go at everything over the years. He's done music, he's done photography, he's done documentaries. He's quite a good humanitarian. He's one of the good guys, I think, really, is what I'm trying to say. So he's always had an interesting path for me to follow. But I didn't know he was on Joe Rogan, so I just came across it by chance, so I thought I'll watch this. And it was really interesting listening to him. Now, of course, I've followed his photography before. I've seen his photography. And my first reaction was a little bit like it all often is when I see people who are famous for doing other things suddenly stray into photography. I had a similar reaction when I discovered, what's his name? That really crap Canadian musician who my wife has a soft spot for. What's his bloody name? Brian Adams? Yeah, he suddenly became a photographer. So I looked at some of his work, and it's all right. It's the kind of stuff that you see on internet forums where, part-timers do nice landscapes and seascapes and stuff. But there was nothing, wow. But because he's famous for being a musician, suddenly he's famous for being a photographer as well. And then another one that I stumbled across years ago was Ian Beale out of EastEnders. For non-UK viewers, EastEnders is a soap which has been running in the UK from the 80s, and the actor playing Ian Beale, Adam Woodyard, got into photography, and his work's interesting. There's a little bit of good stuff in there. Some of it's cliched, but he's a famous British actor. He's famous in Britain. Suddenly he's a photographer, so he must be a good photographer. There's kind of a bit of that to it. And then you see people like Michael Stipe from REM, who are now photographers, and a little bit of me thinks, well, it's great because it means more people are seeing photography, more people are getting into photography, it's got a wider audience. But at the same time, it pisses me off a little because I often think, hang on a minute, you've had your go at fame and fortune, you've had your big payday, you've had your worth as a musician or actor or whatever it is. Bugger off out of the photography sphere. There's enough of us here already trying to scrape a living without people like you coming along and getting your £1 million worth. So it does hurt me a little bit when that happens. Probably some of it is rooted in jealousy. But, I'm thinking, oh, fuck me. I've been at this 20 years, not a chain that achieved the level they have in one shoot because of who they are. It does piss me off, that. It does make me think. And there'll be photographers out there who worked a lot harder than me over the last 1, 2, 3, 10, 15, 30, 50 years who were thinking, well, fuck me, my work's better than his. Why aren't I getting that gig? And it does often come back to that old adage of it's not what you know, it's who you know. But it was interesting listening to Julian on this podcast because I was listening to his, talk about his work, which is quite interesting. And then at about, 1 minute 25, something like that, 1 minute, 1 hour 25 in, Joe says to him, so how did you, when you first started photography, how did you learn it? Did you take classes or? And he says, no, I have no idea what I'm doing, pretty much. So that made me go, huh? And I listened a little bit more. I listened a few times, and he says, I have no idea what I'm doing technically. And he goes on to say that I think, my kind of strength in photography is the aesthetics. I can see a shot, which is the thing I always say that is the most difficult thing to teach to students of photography. You can teach anybody all the tech stuff, but quite often they never get the thing they should be looking at. And I've spoke about it in other podcasts where I've talked about I spent too much time being technically good or trying to be technically good and ended up missing the shot because I was that busy faffing about with tech. So I guess Julian's never going to have that problem because he doesn't know how the camera works. And he goes on to say that he kind of relies on the camera, the auto settings, a good quality camera to get the picture because he hasn't got a clue what he's doing in that respect. And it led me to question that thing even further. And all right then, so if you look on his biographies anywhere, if you look even on Joe Rogan's podcast on YouTube, if you look on the credits, it says Julian Lennon's a Grammy-nominated singer-songwriter, photographer, author, filmmaker. And I thought, well, what then makes a photographer? What is a photographer? Why do I call myself a photographer? Why does Julian call himself a photographer? Why do people say Julian Lennon's a photographer? Why is Michael Stipe a photographer? And I thought, what is it about photography? What is it about the art form, that thing that makes you a photographer? So I thought I'd get into that a little bit today because I think fundamentally it pisses me off that people can come out of nowhere and suddenly be pronounced as profound photographers because they've made some nice pictures. So over the last few days I've been going through this and thinking about it, and I've been equating all sorts of jobs to this and that, and what does this mean, and what, I really kind of like driving myself a bit nuts trying to answer the question. And I got some, I think, answers myself, but it'd be interesting at the end to see you guys comment and feedback to me on what you think a photographer is. So I started thinking about other photographers I know, other photographers I've come across, other photographers' work I kind of like or dislike or I'm interested in, to see where the best photography was, and to see then how those photographers who made, in my opinion, the best photography approached it. And for me, I guess where I'm starting from is I'm saying to be a photographer, you have to understand how a camera works, why it works, what to do with that camera in that scenario before you've put it to your eye and took the picture, found the shot. And I think if you don't do that and can't do that, you can't possibly know what the shot's going to be. The shot is just an happen chance, and anybody can do that. I could hand my camera quite recently. I did a Christmas themed photo shoot for my nephews and nieces, and they wanted to go on the camera. Oh, Uncle Lance, can we have a go on your camera? I'm like, of course you can. Come and sit there. So they come sat on my knee and they held the camera. You know, I held it with them, but they got their hands on the camera. I showed them where the shutter button was, and I'm like, are you ready? 3, 2, 1. And they were taking a picture, and they loved it. And some of those pictures are actually quite good. But does that make them a photographer? They had no idea how it was set up, no idea why it was set up, no idea what the f-stop was doing, no idea what the ISO was doing, or the colour balance was doing, no idea where the focus was. They were just holding the camera, taking a picture. And a nice picture. But it doesn't make them a photographer, does it? The photographer was me, who had done all that, set it up to get nice pictures, or to get the correct pictures. So I was thinking about this as I was mulling over what makes a photographer, what is a photographer. And just going back to Julian Lennon's interview again, he talks a little bit about equating it to his music as well. He's probably still more celebrated as a musician than a photographer, but he equates his music to being self-taught as well. He says he can't read or write music, he's self-taught as a musician. And I thought, well, is that the same thing? So I thought, I've had a similar experience. For 10 years or so in the 90s, I was a musician until I got some real bad ear damage and had to stop playing live, and I carried on for a few years, but I couldn't play live. It would hurt. It hurts now when I listen to anything of a certain pitch, or if somebody shouts too loud near me or blows a whistle, it makes me want to kill them, because I get the ear damage is so bad in my left ear. The pain is so intense I can't bear it. So I don't play live anymore, but I still have guitars around the house. I still record and write music sometimes. But when I started in the late 80s, I wasn't taught how to be a musician. I just wanted to be a musician. And if you look back at the Beatles in the day couldn't read or write music originally. And I came from a background where I couldn't afford to have lessons or have all the latest stuff. And so I was scraping bits of guitars for birthdays, and I even rescued a guitar once off a house fire. It never stayed in tune, but it was a lovely looking guitar. It was like a bit like a Rickenbacker hollow body in Sunburst. And I rescued that and played that. But my dad taught me. My dad could play guitar. He learnt guitar in the 60s, and he taught me how to play the basics in guitar, the chords, and a few little House of the Rising Sun. That was the first one I learned to play. But I was self-taught. And Julian, says that he's self-taught. He probably taught himself from being around his dad and Ringo and John, all those other people, Paul and whatnot. So it's quite easy to pick music up. And photography can be picked up in the same way. I did a very similar thing in photography. When I got into photography, I was around other photographers quite a lot. And I was learning from them, watching, interesting, listening, seeing what things did. But what I did as a musician is I learnt how a guitar works, how an amplifier works, how a PA system works, how miking the PA up through the amp to the PA works, how mixing that works, how getting a soundscape works. I mean, literally, I could strip a guitar down to its bare bones now and tell you how it works, put it back together and make it work for you. I understand all that stuff because I felt to be the best musician I could be, the best guitarist I could be, the best singer-songwriter I could be. I needed to understand properly the thing I was playing. If you don't understand that the neck's not perfectly straight, or is it bowed in or bowed out, why is the action so bad on the fretboard? Why am I always out of tune? Why can I never get the action great from the first fret to the 22nd fret? All those things I learned and understood to make me a better guitarist and a better musician, singer-songwriter. And I then equate that through to photography. To be the best photographer I can be, I need to understand what that thing in my hand does, all its capabilities, all its limitations. And so every camera I've had or I've got, whether it's a digital camera or a film camera or the camera in my pocket on my phone, I stripped it down to basics, not literally, but learnt the basics. Why does it work? All right then. So the ISO, that's the sensitivity of the sensor. How does that work then? How come you can bump it up? What happens to the actual sensor when you bump it up in numbers? What happens physically to the sensor? Oh, it gets warm. Oh, right, so that's creates noise. I learned all this stuff as I was learning to take pictures. And then an extension of that, I learnt how to set up lights in the studio, how flash strobes worked, how natural lighting worked, how combining the two worked. And I spent years learning this stuff to make me be the best photographer, technically and aesthetically, that I could. And I go back again to my early music career to understand how to make the live gig sound better. And I figured out and learned from watching other people and listening and trial and error how to set a PA up, how to set mic and amp up, the importance of monitors, all that kind of stuff. Now I'm sure a lot of people can get away with a lot of that as musicians. They can just play a bloody guitar. But does it make them as good as the people who really understand it? And I think it probably doesn't. I think for you to be competent in any walk of life, whether you're an accountant, or whether you're a musician, or whether you're a photographer, or whether you're a baker, I think if you fundamentally understand the basics, the actual workings of what you're doing and working with, I think that's quite obvious when you see the end outcome, the product that you make from those discoveries. So I think on my journey to discovering what a photographer is, that's kind of where I started. What made me the guitarist and the musician I was? What made me, or makes me, the photographer that I am? And I started to think about, I'm going to look then at other people, other photographers who I class as the best photographers, and see what they do. And part of the story that Julian's telling us is he got to photograph Princess Grace of Monaco, is it, on her wedding, but she kind of hired him just to do some incidental pictures because she liked his style, which is fair enough. And he talks about turning up with his one camera in a bag, and then Patrick Demarchelier turned up with a whole, as you might imagine, band of stuff, because that's how he works: assistants, more cameras, lighting, all that kind of stuff. So although they'd asked Julian to come and do some wedding pictures in his style, they'd actually hired a professional photographer. There's that word again. They'd actually hired a photographer to come and do the real pictures because they wanted his style and I guess they wanted some of his name attached to it as well. But they knew what the quality and level of pictures he would produce. And I guess Julian knew he couldn't do that, or Princess Grace, as she called, whatever she's called, didn't think he could, so she just wanted him for some point and shoot style shots, which is absolutely fine. But I think that kind of dynamic itself tells the difference between somebody taking photos and a photographer. And I think to extend that back out of other photographers I've loved and whose work I've looked at across the years, we'll just look at a few and then bringing that back to me and what I see as a photographer could be quite interesting. So we'll start with Patrick Demarchelier, because he's mentioned in the podcast, and I think we all know, all photographers would know of him and his work. And I've just done the old DuckDuckGo here, and I'm just looking through Mr. Demarchelier's work, and you can see the style, lots of black and whites, but quite intimate portraits in a fashion style. And he might have an entourage of people. He might have a savvy assistant. He might have people, I don't know nowadays, he might have people pulling the strings and taking the shot for him. But I would like to bet that he understands what a shutter does. I bet if Mr. Demarchelier walked in this room now and I said, "What's this, Mr. Patrick? What's this doing?" he would be able to tell me exactly what it is, what it does, and why it does it. And sometimes you notice as people progress through the career, as they get older, I'm certainly noticing now, my idea of going to be a street photographer or a Formula 1 photographer or even a band photographer on stage is tricky because I'm not that healthy and I have a really, really insanely damaged back, and I can't get up and down very quickly. And as much as I love to do the odd gig, I couldn't go out and be a full-time gig photographer because I don't have the physical capacity to do it. So I can understand as you get older, starting to rely on other people to do certain things for you. No problem with that at all. But I think the photographer, certainly of Patrick's generation, would have 100% understood what a camera did, how it worked, why it worked, how to get the shot that they wanted. Easiest example being things like using aperture in your lens to get lots of lighting or not very much light, or to get shallow depth of field, or to get a big depth of field. And they understand those things, and they're very, very vital to getting the shot. Now, I'm not saying that Julian or somebody who approaches photography like Julian can't get those kinds of shots, but it's about knowing and be able to repeat those kind of shots, isn't it? Knowing full well what the camera was set to and why it was set to it to get the actual shot that you wanted. And Mr. Mr. D's, most of his work, it looks quite nice and sharp. So I'm guessing he's shooting some, around f11 for a lot of stuff. This fashion stuff has a little bit of a fine art kind of swagger to it. So, if you look at some of that stuff, he's definitely not shooting wide open, and he's using lots of flash. So, I'm guessing we're shooting around the f11s kind of stage. But still, the great photos. You can tell there is work. There's a lot of repetition gone on, and there's a difference there between point and shooting out for the best and letting the camera do it and setting up yourself. Let's see if we can get the wedding. You can see that the style there is linked to the stuff we looked at previously, and why he might have been brought in to do that, and why Julian wasn't asked to do that. And that's not a slight on Julian. That's just the difference between somebody who is taking photographs and a photographer, I think. And Julian's own admission as the podcast goes on is that he doesn't know how to set lights up or any of that stuff. He's never done any of that, which is fair enough. Not a lot of photographers do. But to call somebody a photographer, this is what I would be expecting to be able to be produced. And maybe that's just because I can do similar stuff, and maybe that's the kind of world I kind of reside in from a photography standpoint. But I think looking at that objectively, could you call somebody taking snapshots at a wedding in the background a photographer when this person is in the same space taking pictures? And I think my argument is, I think that's the start of my argument to say that's where photographers and people taking photographs separate. And that's just one we'll look at. We'll look at some more in a sec. So yeah, Mr. Demarchelier, whatever he was called, great photographer, gets repeat business because he's a great photographer. I don't know for definite, but my guess looking at his work over the years, he knows exactly what he's doing. And although some of the older photographers, like I say, just like me, might employ an assistant to do the hard reaching these days, I know why I want f2.8. I know why I want f75,000. I know why I want ISO 4 billion. Joking. Because the settings of the camera form part of the narrative in the picture, and without understanding the settings of the camera, you can't possibly understand the aesthetics that you've produced on screen or on film, because that's just not how it works. If you get in a shallow depth of field by automatically select, or by letting the camera select auto settings, then that's the camera's done that, not you, and you'll like it because it looks great, but you won't know why. So are you a photographer? I've heard a derogatory term for some photographers over the years, and that's called a GWC. And a GWC stands for guy with camera. And we predominantly used to say it about people that used to hire my studio and others that would turn up with a bag of kit, no idea how to use it, and book a model for £25 an hour to work to artistic nude. And really all they were doing was use as a camera, as a vehicle to get access to beautiful naked ladies. And we nicknamed those guys GWCs, guys with cameras. And if you extrapolate that out further to the people who use photography, they might enjoy it, they might take the odd good snap, they might take a lot of good snaps, but they don't really know what they're doing. Then, although they're doing it for different reasons, they're still just guys with cameras, aren't they? They're not photographers. And I guess, equating it back to music again, I became a musician who knew what I was doing, from being able to solder my own guitar parts that are bust, or my own guitar leads and stuff that are bust, up to being able to fine tune a guitar to the nth degree to be able to sing and play. And I was never the best singer, but I could sing. I was definitely a good guitar player, and I could definitely play. And I understand how to do all that stuff. And I brought that ethos through to my photography, and I also bring it through to my full-time current day job as well. And thinking about that wider, looking at my influences, I said I'd look at my influences and see where I could find people who were like that. And I always talk about David Bailey. You might be sick of me talking about David Bailey, but David is probably my favourite photographer of all time. Two reasons: one, his honesty, and two, his simpleness. And I don't mean he's simple, I mean his pictures are simple. Clear background, white or grey, person, connection, one light, photo, beautiful. And I haven't copied him at all in my career. I've stolen stuff from him because he told me to, but I've never copied anything. But he learned from a guy. He learned from a couple of guys early on, but one of his first jobs was with a studio called John French, a photographer called John French. And again, I'm using that term loosely. If we look on Liopedia, I'm just going to use Liopedia because it's quick, and I ain't got to bust my brain searching for anything. John French was a English fashion and portrait photographer, but there's not a lot on him there. Doesn't help us one bit, that does it? Typical Liopedia. But from what I've seen on documentaries from Bale and other people talk about him, he was a nice guy. He knew what he wanted. He knew how he wanted to look. But he had a bunch of assistants that set up, and more often than not took the shot for him. So theoretically, in England and the UK, if you're a photographer and somebody's working for you, even if they take your shot, the copyright's yours. You're the photographer. But I don't know how much of that link is true there. I don't know how much John French knew about aperture and film speed and all that other stuff, or was it his assistants that knew that and set it up for him? If you look at his work, it's very samey, very similar. There's not a lot going on. He's not doing a lot of low apertures. He's not doing a lot of high apertures. He's not doing a lot of. He's just doing very kind of what we might call today pack shot almost. Wheel the lady in, sit her down, hair, makeup, done, next, and which is fine. But if you look at David Bailey's work, I mean, he says that he uses a camera as opposed to paintbrush because it's quick, and I get that because I'm a bit of a frustrated artist. I was really good at art at school. I did GCSE art and was decent at it. I didn't progress any further because I didn't have any love for it. But I was a good frustrated artist, I think you could say. I once got commended in assembly for drawing a picture of something which is up in Sheffield, which is near us, called Stanwich Pole, which is basically a marker on top of a hill with a load of stones and a pole sticking up in it. And I got a pat on the back in the year assembly for drawing this really good picture. And I had it for years and lost it. But looking back, it was probably pretty good for a 10-year-old. But anyway, so I've always been a bit of a frustrated artist, but I'm insanely impatient. So I can 100% align with David Bailey's feelings of, I take so many pictures and I use a camera because it's quick. And I get that. But if you listen to how Bailey works and watch him working and link that to the presence in his pictures and that kind of like rapid quality of his pictures, certainly studio work. I don't know so much about his location work when he's done stuff out in the Congo and all that other stuff that he's done. And he was in a couple of adverts in the 70s and 80s, was he, for automatic cameras. So we have to give him that. But when you look at his studio work, his fashion work, his portrait work, there's a lot of technical nouns gone into that. It's not happy accident stuff because he repeats it. So I think you can call David Bailey a photographer, even though he was a film director and an artist. I think of him as a photographer because he could repeat what he did. He knew what he was doing and why he was doing it. And that's another kind of nub for me. The picture Julian Lennon uses for his front cover of his book is a lovely picture. It's a fabulous picture, in fact. I even like that he's in it, that kind of like he's in there. I like that. But could he repeat it to the same degree? Could he be in a different room with different people and get the same shot? Possibly. Use the same camera and have a similar light setup. But I know you could pick any one of my shots out of my portfolio and I could repeat it for you with a different person in a different place easily. And I'm not quite sure Julian and many other photographers could, because they've never learnt that. He's quite open about not learning technical stuff, which is fine. But can you be a photographer if you don't know that? Let's carry our journey on a little further. So yeah, Bailey and French, and then another guy who I admire his dedication to photography and dedication to keeping photography going and out there and in people's faces. But again, I'm not quite sure how much of a photographer Rankin actually is. When he first came on my radar in the early 2000s, when I was first kind of starting out, I watched a few documentaries and saw some of his work, and I never thought his work was anything wow. Thought it was all right. And then I realised that a lot of what the work he does is just people setting it up for him. He turns up, takes the shot, And again, there's nothing wrong with that, I guess, if you're having input into what the shot's going to be. Are you selecting ISOs, shutter speeds, f-stops, colours, or are you just relying on your assistants to do that bit for you? And you can see some of his work is repeated. Picture of Schwarzenegger's a great picture, and Bowie, there's some stuff in there you can tell it's kind of done by the same guy. But I think some of that might be his assistants. I'm happy to be proven wrong. I'm happy for Rankin to come in and say, now then, Burkitt, this is the truth. I may be wrong, but I think trying to prove what a photographer is here, and I'm not quite sure that some people in the sphere of photography are actually what you can call a photographer. And I'm probably putting myself in that bracket right now, to be quite honest with you. So yeah, some of Rankin's work's good. I like the Rankin Destroy project he did back in the day. That was good, and that's influenced some of my students over the years. The Rankin Destroy project, that was nice. But I think it leads me to another photographer I'm going to show next, who quite often my students come across and give me, oh wow, his images are amazing. Just look at these images, and they are what they are, and they work well as what they are. But I don't think he's a photographer. And that would be a chap called Gregory Crewdson. And the reason I say he's not a photographer is because photography. The word photography is derived from the Greek, Latin, drawing with light. That's what it means, isn't it? Drawing with light. So I guess really anybody that picks up a camera and draws with light is a photographer, if we strip it down to that level. But for me, a photographer is the person who has the camera in their hand, understands how it works, sets it up to work for them, takes the picture they want because they understood what they were doing. And by takes the picture I want, I mean actually is behind the camera, clicking the button. And Gregory Crewdson, a little bit like some other photographers, is more of a director for me. And I'm not saying his work isn't amazing. There's a lot goes into his work. I appreciate the art that goes into his work, the crew, the setup. I do get all that, but they're very contrived, aren't they? They're not real situations. They're fabricated to look amazing. And I think, yes, he's got creative artistic vision. Kudos to that. Yes, he executes it very well with his team. But in my eyes, he's not a photographer. He's more like a stage director or a stage lighting director who just happens to use photography as the medium to show off what he's built. And I say this to my students quite often, and they always kind of look a bit, when I first say it to them. And then they think about it a little bit and they go, actually, maybe he's not a photographer. So Mr. Crewdson for me is a bit of a red herring. Some great work, some nice work, but is he a photographer? I would say no, he's not a photographer. And for the reason I've just said, his work is brilliant for what it is. But is he a photographer? No. Is it even photography? Some of it. It's just stills, isn't it? So then, I think about, other people that I've admired over the years, and I always come back to William Klein, because William Klein for me was one of the best street photographers you've ever come across. And I know he did other things as well as street. But there was no point and shoot going on. I mean, I'm a bit of a point and shoot street photographer, so I can't talk. But if you look at Klein's work, and again, he admits some of it was contrived. Like this shot here. They didn't just come up to him and point the gun in his face. They asked him to do it for the shot. But look at the grain. Look at the depth of field. Look at the slightly burnt out highlights. That's the kind of stuff that you need to know why and how to be able to do. Even this guy in the background over the kid's shoulder. All lit just enough so you can see it. Probably just using street light, whatever light was there. Looks like sunlight with a soft shadows. But Klein could do a series of those and know why he was doing them and how he was doing them. And again, he might have used some auto help, maybe as he was getting older, bit of focus or auto ISO, or even shooting shutter priority or aperture priority mode to help him as he was getting older. But you can see the style because he knows what he's doing with his camera. He's not winging it. He's not making it up. He knows what film stock he's using. He knows why he's using that film stock. He's not getting any happen chance. None of it's luck. It's all judgment. And, you know, even the fashion stuff he did, which is interesting. You can see patterns in his work, and where he might have had help from the odd assistant, hold a reflector or hold a light or whatever. But he knew exactly what he was doing in camera and why he was doing it, hence why his work was repeatable. So you can call him a photographer because he knew what he was doing and why he was doing it. And that set that he did with a long lens for Vogue, shooting down like that, I just thought was ingenious for when it was. Even this guy looking here at camera, who gives a shit? Look how good that picture is. All that character, all that stuff, and then the fashion models right in the middle. And yes, it's a little contrived, like a little bit like, not quite as contrived as what Crewdson's was, but contrived to get the shot. That was a concept. Lots of happen chance going on because there's people passing by, but he got what he wanted there, and he was controlling the camera. He's not shooting with a wide open aperture because there's enough detail in that picture that's sharp front to back. So he's in the mid ranges, f11s ish, to get that kind of sharpness, because he understood the camera and he knew what he was doing with the camera, and it was repeatable. And I think the more I think about that, what is a photographer issue, it does play down to understanding, doesn't it? I was running lots of different like things, trying to equate in my head, trying to think of different scenarios, and I was thinking of this one. I ride a motorcycle. I'm a bit of a old man rider these days. I have a Yamaha MT-07, which is a 700cc street bike. It's pretty quick, 0 to 60 less than 4 seconds. Max speed about 130, I think. But I ride it like an old man because I am an old man. And I had a bad crash 20 years ago, which stopped me from riding like a lunatic. But I could go down to Donington Park this weekend, spend a few $100 and have a track day and ride a race bike round the track for 10 laps or whatever it is. Does it make me a race rider? Does it make me a motorcycle race rider? Where would I be able to go if I then went and offered Valentino Rossi a race around the track? I can ride a race bike. I've ridden a race bike. One of my oldest motorcycles was something called an RD350 that I had, which was the ultimate race bike, street bike back in the day. That was an actual lethal weapon, and I could ride it like a lunatic then. Does that make me a motorcyclist? Makes me a street motorcyclist, but would it, if I put myself on the track in the professional sphere with a professional, where would I stand? I'd look like a pillock. That's where I'd stand. Even back in my heyday, I would have looked like a pillock. And you can, you know, you can't. I know you can't equate pound for pound and job for job, but I think if you're going to call somebody a photographer, I would expect that photographer to know everything about everything they were doing. I wouldn't expect them to turn up and leave lots to chance and rely on Photoshop and desaturation and cropping to make a picture work, which is what Julian, you know, quite happily explains that's what he did. And in fairness to Julian, he's not saying he's the world's best photographer, and I'm not saying he is. This is not a pick on Julian Lennon. I think Julian's great. I think some of the work he's done over the years has been fantastic. Some of his songs, some of his projects, just him as a guy. You know, I like him as a person. I've never met him, but what I've seen of him, I absolutely like him. But calling him a photographer because he takes pictures really made me sit and think about what a photographer is. Excuse me. And I think to call somebody a photographer, it's got to be more than somebody who's taken photographs. Because like I said, my nieces and nephews took some photographs in this very studio a few weeks back and took them nicely, but they're not photographers. My wife, sometimes when we're out and about, she's learned from me, obviously. She takes some very nice pictures of stuff on her phone mostly. Does it make her a photographer? No, it doesn't. I've taught some very good students who are very good technically, but not very good aesthetically. They just don't get it in camera. They can set up the camera, but they just can't see the picture. They never do. So they're not very successful. So they're not really photographers, even though they understand that they're not photographers. So does that mean a photographer has to be practicing? What does practicing mean? Taking pictures for money, taking pictures for projects, regularly taking pictures. Well, you can get into the realms of what's regular. I've probably done, 30 photo shoots this year alongside a separate full-time job. So I still think I can qualify as a photographer. That's alongside all the other stuff I've done on holidays and whatnot. I know what a camera is. I know how it works. You could pass me any camera in the world and I'll be able to make it do what I want it to do. You can put me on any scenario in the world and I'll get a usable picture. I think I can call myself a photographer, even though currently it's not my first source of income. It's my first source of art. It's the first thing I go to de-stress. It's the first thing I go to have fun. It's the first thing I go to when people say to me, can you come and do this? If it's exciting to me, I'll go and do it. So, what is a photographer? Is it just somebody who has a camera and takes decent pictures now and again, or gets lucky now and again? Or is that a GWC, guy with camera or girl with camera? I think I've not looked at any female photographers on either, but pretty sure from memory the Vivian Mayers and the other great female photographers, Anna Leibovich and stuff, know exactly what they're doing. They understand their camera. They're not just relying on technicians. They're not just turning up and hoping somebody set it up for them. They know exactly what they're doing and why. Kate Winslet recently played, what's her name in that film, didn't she? Kate Winslet recently played Lee Miller in the film Lee, about Lee Miller, who was the photographer. She came through photography, didn't she, as a model, and then got into photography, which happens quite a lot. Models come through that way because they're around photography a lot, and then they get into it. But never mind what she did was ballsy. The fact that she understood the camera enough to be able to go on location like that and take the pictures she did tells you that there was no point in shoot going on. You got to think on your feet. And another one that I've got his book up here. Just give me a sec. Let me dig his book out. Photography books. Where is he? Not Dorothea Lange, although she was great as well. Not Beaton, not Bailey. Don McCullough. There he is. So this book, if you're not read it, Don McCullough's book, Unreasonable Behaviour, and that comes from him pissing off at every opportunity to go and photograph war while his wife was sitting at home thinking, what the hell's going on? Where's my husband? It's a fabulous book. If you haven't read that book, I would advocate you get it and have a read of it. Some of the stories in there are tragic, some of the stories in there are heartwarming, some of the stories in there make you think, that's a fucking photographer. If you're thinking about photography, that's a photographer. The concept of photographer probably starts and ends there. He's got his camera, he's got his lenses, he's got his film, he's got his imagination and his wits. He's shooting in dirt, he's shooting at night, he's shooting in the day, he's shooting in the rain, he's shooting in the sun. He's always making pictures. And he's relying on nothing other than his knowledge, his experience and his intuition. That's a photographer. And I know we can have, lots of variants of that outside of that, but I think if we're going to call people photographers, if we're going to say so-and-so is a photographer, then I think we should be expecting that the bare minimum that they do is know what a camera is, how it works, why it works, and make it work for them. I reckon that's the bare minimum to be called a photographer. And then anything off that, whether you get paid, whether you're doing it for art, whether you're selling prints down the line, is cherry on the top. If you can pick up a camera, move the buttons around, make it take a picture, and repeat that in any scenario, then I think you can be called a photographer. I think if you're a guitarist and you can only play a G chord, you're not a guitarist, are you? You're just somebody who can play a G chord on a guitar. If you're a guitarist and you can play all the chords and some solos, and you know instinctively where things are, I think you could probably be called a guitarist. And you can extrapolate that across all walks of life, and all professions and all things. You know, and I just want to reiterate, I'm not trying to put down on anybody. I'm not trying to belittle anybody. I'm not saying people are shit. I mean, some of the work in Julian Lennon's book is great. But calling somebody a photographer who literally points and shoots, I'm not saying that you can't see the shot, because that's, quite honestly, that is the most difficult part of the whole thing, to teach somebody how to get the shot. Does it make you a photographer if you get lucky? I don't think it does. I think if somebody said to me, pick any picture off any of my websites, if you go on my burkittphoto.com and look at my fashion and portrait stuff, if you look on lanceburkitt.com and see all the other stuff I do, pick any picture and ask me what the setup was, how I approached it, and I'll be able to tell you. And I'll be able, if you walked into my studio 5 minutes later, I'll be able to set it up and recreate it for you. Because as a photographer, I understand the camera, the lens, how it all works, the technical attributes of it, the physical attributes of it, the aesthetic attributes of what that creates. And then have my mind's eye when I'm seeing a picture. I also shoot knowing that the limitations of my camera are this, so in the edit I have to do that to make them how I want them to be. I then have repeatable processes for black and whites, for desaturations, for all manner of things, because I've practiced it and understood it. And nothing's left to chance, nothing's left to auto, nothing at all. You guys all already know my feelings on auto and AI and all that stuff. So I believe I can call myself a photographer. And I believe I have the right to call other people who don't quite have that level of understanding and conception as guys or girls with cameras. And I think if we're going to equate photography to people taking a nice picture now and again, then everybody's a photographer, aren't they? Everybody's a photographer. Everybody's a photographer. I mean, that's what Instagram will have you believe. But they're not. There are lots of people out there who take nice pictures. They're not a photographer. I know some guys who can ride a motorcycle a hell of a lot better than me. Faster, more dangerous, knee sliders on the corner, all that. But they couldn't hold it on the track. I know people drive cars like maniacs, but they couldn't beat Lewis Hamilton. You know, photography is a very niche skill set, really. When you hone it in and put it down to basics, photography is probably the ultimate art form in understanding how to get it right, being able to repeat getting it right, and not leaving any of those things to happen chance, which you do get happy happen chance now and again. But in a studio scenario, for example, if you're setting up doing a portrait for somebody who's preconceived what they want because they've seen your work, you can't leave that to happen chance. You can't just hope on the day things go right. You've got to know exactly camera, light, lens, aesthetics, focal length, positioning, temperature in the room, all those things. And a guy or a girl with a camera can't do that. They just can't do that. So I've just had to go and shut some stuff down because somebody in the unit next door has decided to have a party. So if you can hear anything bleeding through onto the mic, I do apologise. I'm going to have to wrap this up for today because looks like the party is going to stay. So yeah, what is a photographer? I think let's start with the basics. Do you understand the camera? Do you know how it works? Can you make it work for you? Can you repeat it? When you put it to your eye, can you aesthetically see the picture? Do you know what you're looking for in advance? When you get it back and you get in the dark room or you get on the computer, can you finalise what you've envisioned? If you can, whether you shoot once a year or a million times a year, I think you can call yourself a photographer. If you're picking up any camera, your phone, or any camera at all, whether it's a Leica or an Hasselblad or what, and you put it on automatic and you're going anywhere, and you put it to your eye and you're letting the camera decide what the depth of field is going to be, what the ISO is going to be, what the shutter speed is going to be, what the colour balance is going to be, but you're taking nice pictures, or sometimes fantastic pictures, I don't think you can call yourself a photographer. I think you can tell somebody who's creative, who's got ideas, who's got imagination, but they use a camera to take pictures. A photographer, for me, is a totally different thing. I'm happy for you to disagree with me. I might be completely wrong. But I can draw a bit, but I'm not an artist. I can pick up a pencil and a pad tomorrow and probably sketch you something half reasonable. I ain't no artist. Some people might call that art, but I ain't no artist. I'll admit that. If you give me a camera and ask me what the aperture's doing and why, I can tell you exactly what it's doing and why, and how to make it do what I want and why. Same with the guitar. I can pick up a guitar. Now I've got a guitar here. I've got this old beaten up old acoustic guitar here, which I keep down here, and I've not played in years, but slightly out of tune. So I can still play. Am I a musician? Well, sometimes I turn it on and I write songs. A couple of years ago, around my birthday, October, November, December 2022, I wrote 10 or 12 songs that I was going to put together for a new album. Ran out of time, made a bunch of demos, never finished it, but they're still sitting there. Do I know how guitar works? Yeah. Can I tune it up? Yeah. Can I strip it down, rebuild it? Yeah. Do I know how an 8-track or a 16-track or a 32-track studio works? Yeah. Can I set it up and use it? Yeah. The only thing I was never good at is producing and mastering, probably down to the fact that my ears were knackered. I could make a demo and mix it, but it would sound dog shit. But I know my limitations. But does that mean I can't be a musician? I don't call myself a musician anymore because I don't do it for a living. I don't do it for fun. I don't even gig for fun. But I do occasionally write songs, record them. In fact, the very title track for this podcast, Let's Get Into It, was written by my brother Luke and myself in 2012. Luke wrote the music. I played the drums and sang on it. I wrote the lyrics. I produced the music video, shot and edited and put the music video together. That was only 12 years ago. I can be a musician, let's put it that way. So, I see myself as a photographer and I can be a musician. I'm also a qualified teacher. So can I call myself a teacher? Yes, I can. Do I still teach? Occasionally. I'm also a master of, or not a master, a jack of many trades, but master of very few. I can do mechanics, car mechanics. I can fix cars. I know how an engine works. I know how a exhaust works. I know how a catalytic converter works. I know I can change its brakes. I can do all that stuff, but I'm not a mechanic because I rarely do it. And I don't tell people I can do it anymore because they always want you to fix your car for free. But the two biggest for me in my life have been music and photography. I'm no longer a working musician, but I have all the attributes to be a musician. I still work as a photographer, although be it not full time. But I don't call myself a semi-professional or a professional because those tags are just for idiots. I'm a photographer who happens to do another day job as well. And that's because I completely understand my craft. And I think if we start and finish our discussion about what a photographer is there, then I think we're on a pretty good thing. I think we'll not be very far off the truth. I think if we stop allowing people who just take pictures because they can to be called photographers, then photographers might get a bit more worth than what they actually get. And photography's been watered down by digital. I mean, digital's great, it's cheap, convenient, fast, all that stuff, but it really has watered down the quality of photographs. And you know, that adage that everybody can be a photographer is bullshit. Everybody can take pictures, but not everybody's a photographer. Anybody can get an app and put some prompts on it and write a song, but they're not a songwriter. And I think we just need to be careful how we kind of approach photography and how we let it go. We need to keep a tighter rein on it and make sure people that are being called photographers actually do earn and deserve that badge. Because quite frankly, I think when you look out, a lot of people who are labelled as photographers are just people who take pictures, and that's a very different thing. Thanks for listening. I'll be back probably sometime between Christmas and New Year with I must get that out of my system, the Franken Skies episode. I must do an episode on the Franken Skies. I'll have to collate all my pictures and all my thoughts, which is going to get into some kind of like rough territory about fake climate change and what all that is and why, and how Franken Skies are really going to kill you. But we'll get into all that good stuff between now and Christmas. So have a good Christmas. Hope you get some nice presents. If you don't, it's only another day, innit? Who cares, really? Who cares? Anyway, thanks for listening. Catch you on the flip side.